Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from Chris. I wrote, recorded, and mixed the whole album in my house with a cadre of very talented musicians and vocalists, either recording here or sending in parts from their respective home studios. 100% self-financed and produced, it is quite niche and not for everyone, but I hope you and some of your audience will appreciate it for what it is. Now that might sound familiar. If it does, don't click away yet. Chris submitted another track of his from his band Neural Glitch a couple of weeks ago. It was a cover of Synchronicity 2 by The Police, and I learned a lot of interesting stuff from that. It was a hyper maximalist, somewhere between the realms of metal and electronic, many layers, lots of ideas, constantly moving, really at the edge of what I think the electronic metal mixture that we see a lot of in the mainstream world can be pushed towards. It's a bit experimental, a bit avant-garde, and admittedly, a bit too much for me at times, but I do find it interesting to see what is out on the edge of music. One thing that I did learn from Chris in the comments was that I thought a lot of that was sample based, and they said that the only thing that was programmed was the drums, which I thought was pretty impressive. So I've been waiting a couple of weeks to get to this to see some original music from Neural Glitch. Let's dive in and see what's going on with the track Phase Shift.
You have no idea what is real.
I like that synth idea in the background. I was expecting a full drum fill there, but I'll take a drop instead. Ooh, yeah, the accent pattern shift at the beginning of this phrase. So I like the sound of the bass in the background, its rhythmic feel. Interesting to hear it contrast against the percussive elements of that higher pitched synth stuff. Chopping up the synth too to create a rhythmic pattern out of that. Chopping up the whole song. Okay. Yeah, hitting the LFO. bring it in to explode again. It feels like it should be relaxing, but it's so high energy. Really high-pitched shrill thing happening over there.
Is this real?
Is this really happening right now?
Is this real enough for you?
This reality is an illusion.
Takes me out by one bar. Okay. Yeah. The phasing in and out of the full body sound. Yeah, I can get behind that. That's a fun way to wrap that up. Yeah, I think most of what I want to talk about isn't going to be too different from my analysis of Synchronicity 2. There's certainly, I think, more focus to this. And to me, that is a benefit. It's still quite maximal, but it tends to rein it in a little more often and trying to figure out where the balance is of retaining that, incredibly experimental sound while, I don't know, having like a level of palatability to everything as well. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, my tastes tend to sit a little closer to the mainstream than I think most metalheads, and even still, I found this to be quite palatable and listenable. And I thought that the ways that it incorporated more electronic ideas, particularly in production and transition ideas, was, on the whole, it felt more palatable and it made sense in a lot of ways too, where maybe a metal band might have used a drum fill in order to transition between ideas. Here we use production, and I think that ends up working pretty well. It threw me off a couple of times, but I started to kind of feel out how the composition is done on this, and beginning to have a better ability of sussing out where the song might be going, not based off of where other bands take it or where my biases expect them to go, but where Neural Glitch decides to take songs. And I found that once that started clicking, I could begin to map out a little bit of a map of how the song operates, especially pairing it back to Synchronicity 2 and taking what I learned from that. I think I have a pretty strong idea of how Neural Glitch goes about crafting a song. And so from here, I think it's best to talk about the music in sections and how a section is built up, I think, based on listening to these two songs. Um, Particularly this one, though, there are a lot of layers in pretty much any section of the track. There is usually guitars giving a bit more of a texture and rhythmic idea. They might have a little bit of pitch movement, but it is not the core focus of a lot of the guitar work. There's so many other instruments getting pitch stuff going on that the guitars don't really need to worry about that role too much. There's a bass guitar that typically gives us rhythmic information alongside the bass kick. The two of them together create a big punchy bassy sound at the bottom of the track that actually sounds really nice. It's a low sound in a lot of this. Um, and I have a hard time hearing bass as it is. But I heard it. It wasn't in a sub bass range, but it's just very low bass work. But it ends up giving a really nice punchy sound to the low end on this track. We have drums that are pushed into the background. I know in the email, Chris and I talked a little bit, and they mentioned that they thought the production was going to be the weak point. And even when we checked out Synchronicity 2, I think one of my criticisms was like, or one of the topics I brought up is that the production is solid. I really don't have a lot of criticism for it. And the same goes here, except I'm noticing the drums are very difficult to hear. The only thing I'm really able to pick out consistently is the snare. It has its own little pocket, I think, as far as pitch goes, that even without a lot of volume behind it, it still cuts through a lot of the noise by sort of having its placement in the EQ kind of carved out, where only that snare sound cuts through the whole song. The bass kick, I can hear it because it's accompanied by the bass guitar often, but it also kind of gets drowned out by a lot of other stuff too. And I had a really hard time hearing cymbals, if there were any, in some of these places. But see, here's the thing, right? I want to ping pong this back a second. I don't think it's really that big of a problem because the song has a lot of groove and rhythm and percussive elements in other instruments. It's not like I ever lost track of the groove even though I couldn't hear the drums. I think it actually kind of works out. It's an interesting sonic palette. It takes a second to attune to, but I don't think it's bad in any way. I think if nothing else, it just creates something that feels rather unique to Neural Glitch. Although I don't remember having this problem when we checked out Synchronicity 2, so it might just be something with this song or maybe even this stack of instruments. So we have like this core rock band, metal band makeup here. There is a ton of other layers going on electronically, though. There's little synthy runs going on. There's synthy percussive stuff that sounds like almost like a plucked string, or maybe piano might even be it too. But that it's later been distorted and digitized, and I don't know what kind of patches they're using on their synthesizer or keyboard or whatever in order to achieve these sounds, but they're typically a bit on the higher end. There's usually two of them going on, and they're sort of dancing around each other, creating, they're adding to the atmosphere, sure, but I kind of get more of a texture thing out of them. But one of them is always doing some sort of melodic idea as well, something usually an ostinato. I don't think I heard much in the way of like linear melodic writing, but some sort of loop that kind of exists in the higher end on a bit of a longer wavelength, something that isn't just like, a 2-beat idea. Usually we're talking like 2 to 4 beats, or sorry, 2 to 4 bars. Just something to keep the song feeling like it's moving in a melodic fashion, because we don't have melody coming out of the vocals either. They're just harsh sounds, texture, and rhythm. Um, and I think that's most of what's going on instrumentally. There's probably a few ornamental instruments that have little ideas here and there, maybe like 3 or 4 notes as a little flourish, and then they disappear. I remember hearing something on the outskirts of the song around minute 2, and I can't remember what it is for the life of me. Some sort of texture on the outside, though. Little embellishing ideas. They're all over the place. This thing is full of them. It's where most of the layers come from. But I think this core idea of the bass, the guitars, and the drums giving us rhythm and texture, giving us that core beat, and the sound of the guitars, and then the vocals on top of that, and then the like ornamental lead melody stuff on the synths. That's the core of every single section. Sometimes the vocals are removed, sometimes they're there, but this pretty much makes up every section of the song. It's just, what are any of these instruments doing? Does the beat change? Does the riff change? Does the ostinato change? These are the things that determine what each of the sections is, how they feel, how they're different from another. But this sort of building block idea and roles given to each instrument seems rather consistent on this track. What I think makes this stand out so much, though, is the production on it. not just how things are EQ'd or how they're layered or balanced or anything like that, but it's the production tricks. It's the low frequency emitter where we'll kind of remove all the low end and it feels like the sounds, scoop in on themselves and shrink. It's the panning that happens so often. It's the chopping up of ideas. Maybe we have a little piano run and now we're going to chop it up rhythmically and create a rhythm on top of the run. This happens with the vocals a lot, where it'll just be a long held out scream and then it'll get chopped up into shorter bursts where we can create a rhythm out of that. That happens so often on transitions. Um, there's I mean, it's all the little things. And I think this is really interesting because as a composer coming from a classical background, um, when I learned composition, I learned classical composition. I had to write pieces for, orchestras and string quartets and stuff like that back in school. So when I think of transitions, I think of harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic. How can I have these core instruments take the music to the next space? And it's really different to think about things sonically. How do we transition this sonically? How can I change the atmosphere and the sonic palette of this section to take us to the next? This is how a lot of electronic music happens. When you think of, trance or house or dubstep or, whatever, electropop, it's very rarely that a musical idea is introduced to bring us to the next section. I mean, this is where the whole concept of the drop comes in, where you bring the music into basically nothing, and then on the downbeat of the first of the next bar, you punch in with like everything back up, right? This isn't new music. This is all done on the production side of things. You're playing with volume, you're playing with layering, you're playing with textures, with filters and stuff like that. It's a very different way of approaching composition, and it's something that's just very foreign to me in a lot of ways. And to hear it in a metal context is really interesting because metal typically adheres to the traditional way of composing transitions, which is through musical composition with drum fills, with punctuating ideas on guitar riffs, with cutting out or adding of layers. There are certainly metal songs out there that'll cut out to nothing. It'll just be like the vocals and be like do 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 do, and then the band will come in with like a big breakdown, and they'll use like silence and vocals, sort of texture stuff like that. But it's just something that I don't see too often in the realm of metal. It's a very digital electronic thing, and to hear it being used this way, in these ways, playing around with filters and all sorts of stuff that I don't understand and probably don't even have the language for, and hearing it within a very metallic song, I think is very interesting. Um, and more or less, I often dug it. It's fresh, it's new. I talked earlier on at the beginning of this video that metalcore, alternative metal, they play around with electronic elements with synthesizers and production and stuff. Like it's becoming more mainstream to hear these elements in the realm of metal. But I feel like this is just so much more. This feels like electronic music that happens to have metal growls and guitars in it, more so than metal music that happens to have synths in it. And I think it's a very cool direction to take both of these sounds. At the end of the day, it definitely feels like an electronic track to me more than metal, but sonically it uses the timbres of metal, and I think that's going to draw a lot of people to it. The last thing I want to bring up then is the vocals. I found this to be interesting because assuming that there aren't any samples on here, which might have just been a description of Synchronicity 2, and I might be misascribing it to the creation of this track, but we have a lot of harsh vocals in here. That's probably one vocalist. There is one or two sentences where there's clean vocals, and then that devolves into spoken word stuff that we get towards the end of the track. A lot of the time we have a person saying something that isn't very melodically interesting, whether it is growling, whether it is spoken word stuff. And it's usually modified to make it more interesting, whether that's pitch modification or digitization of sound or yeah, chopping up an idea and creating a rhythmic element out of it. That happens, like I mentioned, a lot with the harshes, usually when they're just holding a note out, which is not really interesting. It's good for atmosphere, it's good for texture, but rhythmically, melodically, harmonically, that's not interesting. So we'll make it interesting in post. And I think it's pretty interesting then to hear that being applied to the spoken word too. We have, well, even not just the spoken word, but we have sounds bouncing around between center channel and the outsides, and they're sort of overlapping and creating something rather cacophonous. We actually heard this on Synchronicity 2 as well, but I think here, once again, it's just more palatable. A lot of these ideas of hyper layering songs and bouncing ideas around all over the place and having multiple vocal tracks going at once was very overwhelming in Synchronicity 2. And here I just feel like there's a really nice midpoint found where you can still achieve these sounds, you can still approach that maximalist composition style, but it doesn't feel as overwhelming, it doesn't feel that jarring, and it doesn't feel as off-putting to somebody who isn't um, well exposed to this type of music and layering and composition. This just ends up feeling more focused to me, less chaotic. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, maybe like, dang, I really thought this was my most chaotic song. In which case, I apologize for the comment. But I find this to be a lot more palatable than the other song and less chaotic and less wild in general, and just easier to follow while still retaining a lot of those core components that I'm attributing to Neural Glitch as just sort of the style that the artist creates. So I think this is a solid track to introduce someone to Neural Glitch. I kind of wish we had started with it and been like, this is a palatable side of them, but they've also gone, way maximalist with a cover. If you're interested, we'll check that one out later. But I think this is definitely the one you want to introduce people to first. I'm going to go see if I can find some lyrics on this, and then we're going to wrap this video up. Unfortunately, I couldn't. I asked for so much else in the emails to help me with thumbnail making and context to understand this stuff, and I completely forgot to ask about lyrics. So Chris, if you see this and you're so inclined, you can put the lyrics in a comment under the video, and if you want, I can do a little bit of lyrical analysis on that, kind of see how it pairs back to the music and if there's any sort of parallels between themes between the music and the lyrical side. If you want, I can go ahead and do that. But anyways, these are my thoughts on Neural Glitch's phase shift. What did you think about this? Did you enjoy it? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe you have your own thoughts, opinions, perspective on this track. Please put all of that down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find some links for Neural Glitch, their social medias, streaming platforms, websites, stuff like that. You'll also find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. If you head over to any of Neural Glitch's sites, like, subscribe, thumbs up, stars, whatever helps them out over there. And that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.